Metrobank, the first ever champion partner of women's and girls cricket, have joined forces with the ECB to launch the Metrobank Girls and Cricket Fund. This initiative aims to triple the number of girls' cricket teams by the end of 2026. We know that women who play sport are more confident, have better career opportunities and social mobility, and that's why Metrobank is getting more women and girls to participate in cricket. Through the Girls and Cricket Fund, Metrobank want to support anyone interested in being part of this change to become a cricket volunteer or coach today. To find out more, visit metrobankonline.co.uk/cricket. Hello and welcome to the Wisden Women's Cricket Weekly podcast. We've got a fair bit lined up today. There's the start of the England-New Zealand series, an epic Charlotte Edwards Cup finals day. Smriti Mandhana is arguably in the form of her life, and we'll also hear from one of those people instrumental in looking after the Afghanistan women's team who fled their homeland when the Taliban took over the country and sought refuge in Australia. I'm Rana, and with me as ever is Lauren Winfield-Hill. Lauren, a nice and early finish for you yesterday in Durham. England were really good.
Yeah, they were dominant. I think, yeah, the last series against Pakistan, they probably got a little bit of scrutiny at times, even though the results and the outcomes were good. In terms of, I guess, like the details of the games, wasn't it, really? And I think it's been something that's been spoken about. John Lewis has openly and Heather have openly sort of discussed that they're really happy with their T20 blueprint, but they felt like their ODI blueprint probably had a little bit of work to be done on. But I think the last ODI against Pakistan and the ODI yesterday was pretty much the mold in which they will want to play. I think the spinners were awesome. I think New Zealand just looked like they just weren't at the races. It was a pretty timid first half with the bat. But you've got to give massive credit to England, like I say, particularly the spinners. And that run chase was, you're in a luxury position, aren't you, when your bowlers have done such a good job and you're chasing such a low total. But I think it's the brand and the style, isn't it? And it's a lot more than just winning the game. I think you want to really put a marker down and almost, bury the opposition. And I think that was very much what England managed to do.
Yeah, it's a very authoritative start to a series, knowing that New Zealand, you're playing each other so much in the next few weeks. You're right to point out how well the spinners bowled. So Charlie Dean took 4 for 38, a couple of stats around her. So that's the 6th time she has taken 4 or more wickets for England in an ODI. Only Catherine Sciver-Brunt has done that on more occasions for England, and Dean is still only 23. She averages less than 20 with the ball in ODI cricket. Lauren, what does Dean do so well? Why is she such an effective bowler, particularly in 50-over cricket?
Control, I think, for sure. I think control and consistency, and that's 2 things that she spoke about yesterday that she's been working on. I think the rise has probably been the last couple of years really for Charlie Dean. I think that's probably the biggest difference. I remember sort of when a couple of years back when I was around the fold, you'd always felt like you'd get a bad ball and over. And if that bad ball and over goes for 4, then you can easily cruise at sort of 6 and 7s. Whereas now you don't really get the bad ball. She keeps the stumps in play. And if you're trying to be aggressive against her, you've almost got to make the play as the batter and take the risk. And with that, obviously comes wicket taking opportunities for Charlie. I think as well, and it's something that she's spoken about, is this little trio of spinners, just how productive and well, I just think it's the best spin attack in women's cricket. They've got all bases covered, and they all seem to complement each other nicely in terms of you've got everything covered in terms of the spin in which way it spins, but also different degrees of pace. Sophie Ecclestone can go up and down in pace. Sarah Glenn's a little bit quicker and flatter. And then Charlie Dean's got the ability to go up and down in pace. But they've all got really good control. I think, I think that the percentage of how many balls hit the stumps for all 3 of them, it is very high. And like I say, Charlie Dean's probably just been she's like the cherry on the top, isn't she? It was always that look, we're out there looking for, the next off spinner, probably since, you sort of think like Laura Marsh, Danny Hazel, there hasn't been an off spinner that's really come in and sort of grabbed the bull by the horns and made that place her own and complemented the other two that have obviously been around a while now and been world-class performers. So I think, yeah, she's sort of been that missing piece that England needed for a while. And she's very much made that spot her own now.
New Zealand actually started pretty briskly against England quick. They were 56 for 1 after 10 overs. And you're right, the innings totally fell apart against the England spinners. As a batting unit, what do you think New Zealand can do differently against that spin threat in the middle overs?
Well, I just think at times it just looked like everybody was sort of making the same mistake, in terms of playing around your front pad or, playing across the line. There's a lot of just batting on middle and just sort of, I don't know, you talk about negating that middle space in the crease, don't you, in terms of getting depth and playing off the back foot or advancing down the wicket and trying to get closer to the pitch of the ball. And there wasn't really a lot of that. I think the thing that England's, and you can almost call it as soon as a batter comes out, is if there's no fine leg, they're going to paddle. So if there's no square leg, they're going to sweep. And New Zealand didn't really make any plays at all against the spinners to unsettle them, whether it was a use of the feet forward and back, a sweep shot, a paddle. There was, even changing your guard. So someone like Charlie Dean, she almost bowls quite full, where she's quite hard to advance down because you almost end up yorking yourself. So sometimes it's better to get leg side of it. So you've got, a nice back path and you can get a nice swing and you can access both sides of the ground. But there was nothing, it was almost, there was no real method. It looked like there was a fairly conscious effort to play spinners off the back foot, which often at Durham is not easy to do because it is historically a little bit slower and lower. And I do think, I think England were a bit loose at the start with the seamers. Lauren Bell struggled for sort of lines and lengths at times. And it looked like, and it was very similar to England, really, which I found quite bizarre how it took so long for Sophie Devine to get spinners into the game, given in the first innings, it felt like it was almost a game of two halves. Against Seam, it looked an absolute dream. It felt like there was runs everywhere. And obviously short boundaries, lightning fast outfield. And then the spin came on and it looked completely different. And then New Zealand bowled predominantly Seam until I think England were 80 off 10 overs before there was an introduction of spin. So it was interesting, both sort of tactically and methodically, really, by New Zealand.
Yeah, it definitely felt like New Zealand let England bowl their best balls a lot, and they didn't do anything to deviate or force England to deviate from their plans. There's a lot of balls that it felt like New Zealand didn't really have an answer for the balls that were just sort of hitting the top of the stumps, if that makes sense. Like they're getting trapped in the crease, struggling to rotate the strike. So it'll be fascinating to see how that sort of dynamic plays across the series. I thought we'd got to mention Amy Jones because we talked about her keeping a couple of weeks ago. I thought she was absolutely amazing yesterday. The catch off Devine, I think Eccleston was bowling. It's a genuine thick outside edge, serious deviation, moves her hands, very clean catch. You can sort of like underestimate her value to a team because it's harder to quantify how many runs is that worth at the end of a game. But when you've got a keeper who's that reliable, who takes catches that difficult, it makes such a difference.
Oh, God, yeah. And how many runs it's worth? Last time Sophie Devine played against England, she got 100 in New Zealand. So it's worth a hell of a lot. When she's definitely the most destructive batter in that lineup. And that's what we spoke a little bit about, actually, how she'd almost be licking her lips at a 47-meter, pocket boundary. And that was crucial. And it's because she's so sort of, she goes out about her business so quietly. She's so understated. But like you say, that's not a regulation take. That's not just a really fine edge where, the line of your hands doesn't really change much. That's a thick edge. And she just makes it look really simple. Like, of course I'm going to catch that. Whereas for everybody else, you think that's probably, it's gone past the keeper and slip on the shin or whatever, so she just, and that's a lot of what we spoke about, isn't it, in terms of she makes the difficult stuff look really simple. And I think that's that's Amy Jones in a nutshell, isn't it? She just gets stuff done.
You mentioned the chase already, but Maya Boucher and Tammy Bowman were utterly ruthless. So they put on 137 in 17 overs, which is the fastest ever 100-run stand for England in ODI cricket, opening stand rather. They seem quite settled as a pair at the moment. I wanted to ask you about Tammy, because when I see her bat like that, I don't understand why it's not quite working for her in the T20 setup. Because yesterday they were going at eight almost without taking too many risks, doing it so casually. And when you see about that, you're like, why isn't it working at the moment? And why is she only a peripheral member of the England T20 setup?
Yeah, it's a really good question, isn't it? I think first things first. I think Tammy looked back to her best yesterday. I don't think we've quite seen the best of Tammy this summer so far in an England shirt. She's looked a little bit flat and going to unusual options early for her in sort of ODI cricket. And I think yesterday she had that swagger. She had the shoulders back, and I sort of said I like, when Tammy, you can see a lot from her body language. And I think she's almost like, being on the peripheral of the T20 stuff and backs against the wall. And she's the kind of person that she's like, she doesn't roll over, she'll be like, I'll show you how good I am. And I think that was a real statement piece from Tammy yesterday. In terms of why it hasn't clicked for her in T20 cricket, I think T20 cricket, it's very easy to say, well, why don't you just play the same way you do in 50 over cricket? It'll be good enough for T20 cricket. Because a lot of people nowadays are they score pretty quickly anyway. But it's just the mental side of the game, isn't it, in T20 cricket? And I think it's when to pull the tools out, whether it be your ramps, your reverse sweeps, etc., etc. I remember Henrik Larsson speaking when I was at the Ovals last year, and I was speaking to him about batting. And he said, I've actually used less tools and just done them really well. Instead of trying to hit and move around loads and all these, trying to hit absolutely every area. He's like, well, I basically just have 4 shots that I do really well. And I think that's always the challenge with T20 cricket, is that there's so many things you could do. And you look at someone like Josh Butler or Nat Siva-Brunt or whatever. They've got everything. They can ramp, they can reverse, they can run down the ground and belt it over the sight screen for 6. But it's knowing when to do it. And actually, I think probably a little bit is like power play batting, especially. And you've seen it a little bit from, I think Joss is a bit similar in terms of, like, he sometimes does things early and you think, there's only 2 out. Did you need to? But it's like this whole positive brand and intent, when actually it's like your staples probably work really well in the power play, particularly. And then you field spreads and you might need to then pull out your other tools. But I think the decision-making element and almost everything feeling a little bit more like you've got to do it earlier and a bit more rushed and a bit more frantic, sometimes probably makes batters forget, actually, my good sound cricket shots at this stage is spot
on. Before the first ODI, England added Ryana MacDonald-Gay into their squad, a 20-year-old seamer who plays for the Stars and the Oval Invincibles. You shared a dressing room with her. What does she bring?
Yeah, Rihanna's an awesome young cricketer, young person, really. She's a great athlete, and she actually had to make a bit of a decision between hockey and cricket a few years back, because I think she was on the GB program with hockey as well. The thing I love about Rhea is, and I remember a few times she's bowled at the Oval at the death, and I think she's got great character under pressure. She's almost like not a youngster where she gets too phased, or if she gets hit for a boundary, it's not frantic and almost doesn't want to be in the cauldron. She sort of handles pressure really well. She's a hard worker. She's a great athlete, gun fielder. And she's got great skills with the ball, particularly I think her death skills are fantastic. We've seen her with the new ball and up top a little bit more this year than we have in previous years. But she was sort of the standout bowler really for, in the England development games against Pakistan, but also in New Zealand. a genuine wicket-taking threat, but she can bowl in all three phases of the game. You know, she's got great back of the hand slow ball, Yorkers. She's got a yard of pace, so she can, you know, she can rush a batter. But she's got awesome skills. You know, she's the modern day sort of fit, really. She can, you know, she can belt it at the back end. She's a good athlete in the field and got great variations, really. But like the thing I was probably like when I first went to the ovals, and I remember saying to JB, I was like, this youngster's good. Like she's got something about her. And it's probably just more her professionalism and her ability to handle pressure at such a young age.
It feels like England are trying to build quite a big group of young seamers. Obviously, it's not that long ago since it was still Anya Shrubsole and Kat Witney owning the bowling, and you know, understandably, people wondering, well, what happens next? These two have done it for so long, but actually, in the last couple of years, there've been quite a big group of seamers aged 22, 23 and below who are getting opportunities. So actually, England have managed that transition fairly well.
Yeah, really well. And I think it's probably been, I guess it's in line with the domestic game and growing the domestic game, isn't it? In terms of, you know, players having the opportunity to play better cricket, to be professionals, to play in the 100. So we're sort of unearthing a lot more talent than I guess the system allowed for a few years ago. It was almost like the rich just got richer sort of thing. You were in and you were amongst it, and that was sort of set in stone, really. It didn't sort of change too often, whereas now it's very different. And I think that's the way it should be, you know, like especially with bowling. We all know that injuries are a big thing with bowlers, keeping bowlers on the park. It's the same in the men's game, isn't it? It's managing your bowlers so they're fresh and they're ready and raring to go. And then I think the other bit is as well is like, you know, you don't have to play the same team T20 and ODIs or tests. You know, it always used to be like your best sort of 14, you know, your best team and your best 14 played everything and nothing really changed. Whereas I think we're seeing a little bit more so now that different skills are required at different times and in different formats. And I think, you know, building almost a big bank of fast bowlers and even, you know, spinners that are coming through as well. There's a lot of we've seen it like we spoke about Jodie Grucott coming through. She played for the development team. I think she's a batter that's almost just sort of getting her spin bowling as a second string, but we're getting a big pool in all aspects, and I think that's the way it should be.
No, it's exciting times for sure. We got our preview all wrong for the Charlotte Edwards Cup final last week. We bigged up the Vipers, and the Vipers fell 5 runs short in the semi-final, not even getting to the final. And in the end, table-topping Blaze won it on the day, beating the Stars by 7 wickets in that final. Just on that semi-final, Tilly Coleman, who we talked about a few weeks ago, she had another very, very good game and finishes the competition. And remember, she's only 16, finishes the competition with 16 wickets at 13. And I think even more impressively, an economy of 5.15 runs and over. So an extraordinary campaign for her. And then in the final, it was the Bryce sisters again who are having this incredible summer, both with Scotland and then domestically in England. They both hit 50s. And it's another Scotland-born player who's leading from the front for the Blaze, Kirsty Gordon, who has done a great job as leader. From afar, she looks like a really fierce competitor, Kirsty Gordon. You can imagine her being someone who really thrives in the heat of battle.
Yeah, I think we spoke about it last week, didn't we? We were sort of previewing it. She gets that like white line fever a little bit, but I don't mind that. I think she's a great leader of that group, and I think sometimes it takes a bit of a captain to almost like rally the players and get them really competing and get them up for it. And I think she's done a great job of that, especially, you know, there's quite a lot of fairly quiet characters in that Blaze group. You know, the Bryce sisters are, you know, they just go about their business. They're not overly in your face or anything like that. So I think Kirsty Gordon actually complements the group really nicely, where she's sort of like the one on the front line that's, you know, dragging the troops with her. So a lot of credit has to go to her as well. We didn't get the predictions right, but we did hype Tilly, so that was we got that bit right, didn't we?
That's true.
But yeah, fair play to Blaze. They've been building nicely. I think, like you said, the Bryce sisters are, I think particularly Catherine Bryce, her batting's just gone through the roof this year. It was always that she was that niggly opening bowler that hooped big in swingers, and she was more known for her bowling than her batting. But I think this year she's really added almost like a destructive dimension to her game as well. Like she's taking it on and playing a key part, coming in at number 3. Almost like the extra responsibility served her really well.
Definitely. Someone else who's having a great time at the moment is Smriti Mandhana, who's just had an extraordinary series against South Africa over in India. She hit 290 in the 3 ODIs there, which means she now has more women's ODI hundreds than any other Indian players. When she's on song, there are very, very few players like her.
Yeah, she's class. She's great to watch, isn't she? She's just got this pure technique and a simplicity to her game. But yeah, she's in a rich reign of form. I think it's in form so funny, isn't it, in cricket? Because I remember last year in the WPL, she struggled big time in terms of she'd just taken over the captaincy and all, there was a lot of pressure on her, and she looked like you couldn't see her really scoring a run. And then this time round, she looked an absolute touch of class, and she's just continued that sort of rich vein of form. But yeah, I think it's just one of those things, isn't it? When you almost get like a taste for runs and batting, and it becomes really enjoyable and really simple. It's a wonderful place to be, and it seems like she's definitely sort of found that sweet spot. It's just confidence, isn't it? It's knowing when you go out there, you've got only the last game or a couple of games ago to almost still be fresh in your memory. And I think the other thing is, when you're in a series like that where you're playing the same team, you create a lot of wounds, don't you? If you sort of get the upper hand early, you see bowlers misexecute a lot more. That the opposition comes under immense pressure. And it's one of those things where when she's in this this vein of form, it just looks so easy. You think, I don't know how we're going to get her out.
Yeah, I mean, it must have been a very good series to watch live. I mean, that second game, it was 325 played 321, and Mandhana scored 136 off 120 for India, and then South Africa fall 4 runs short. Laura Wolfart hit 135 of 135 unbeaten herself. So that's probably the most aesthetically pleasing pair of 130s that you're gonna see. The two teams there actually play a test match that starts tomorrow in Chennai, so that'll be really interesting to follow as well. And finally, Afghanistan's men's team have been in the news this week, getting to their first ever World Cup semi-final. We've talked about what's happened to their women's team and how they were forced to flee their homeland, receiving minimal support from their cricket board and the ICC on the weekly podcast that came out on Tuesday. So if you want to hear a longer discussion around Afghanistan, head to that. But today we thought it'd be good to hear more about what's happening to those players. So here is Katya Witney speaking to Olivia Thornton, who's the CEO of Cricket ACT in Canberra, in Australia, who's been working closely with the Afghanistan players and what their life has been like since they came over to the country a year or so ago.
Cool. So could you just tell me a little bit about what your role has been with the Afghanistan women's cricketers who've settled in Australia?
It's been behind the scenes role, to be honest. Once the girls were here in country, and obviously half went to Melbourne, half came to Canberra here, it was about trying to connect them in, one, just to check in on them and their families first and foremost, and try and provide some advice around logistics, where to get SIM cards from, where to get those everyday things that we take for granted. But then it was about connecting the girls with local cricket clubs. And I must admit, it's probably in my professional career one of the most, the richest experiences I've ever had. But watching those cricket clubs just embrace these girls and get behind them and understand, we'll start to understand their culture and provide support, and the sharing of food and equipment and all those sorts of things, because the girls, they came with nothing, or 7 kilos of luggage in their backpack. So it was a big thing for them to settle into Canberra, and we used cricket as a vehicle to try and help accelerate that.
So could you also tell me a little bit about the process of getting the players from Afghanistan to Canberra?
Yeah, so there was a group of people, and again, a lot of these people have been just in the background, and people that have got a strong connection to the game, and a really, a strong connection to the female game in particular. I must admit, I wasn't privy to a lot of the workings, and I know there was a lot of late nights and a lot of spreadsheets and a lot of back and forth between players in country and a group of people here. Once they were here, that's when I sort of, was able to, again, through our community cricket clubs, really try and provide them support whilst on the ground. So, I didn't ask too many questions, I must admit. There were deadlines, things were changing, all those sorts of things. So I sort of just, again, like a cricket team, you play to your strength, and my strength here was to be able to connect with our local people who, as I said, have just embraced them, and their families as well.
And how many of the players settled in the ACT territory?
So 9 official contracted players, but one that loved the cricket as well, and is a good little player. So we said 10.
And over the course of the last about a year and a half now, I guess, how has that kind of support developed over that time?
One of the things, again, it wasn't always just about the cricket piece either. It was trying to connect them with the right services here in terms of refugee support, trying to understand where they're at from an education perspective, whether that was of interest or a priority at the moment, and to try and get them in and connected to relevant, educational institutions in town. The girls, whilst it was there's probably an element of a honeymoon period too, and then there was a bit of a dip, but again, being able to recognise that and try and preempt that and have things in place, and whether it was, again, sharing food's such a massive part of their culture. And I remember the first dinner I went to, I honestly thought there was about 30 people coming, and it was for 2 of us. It was just this wonderful spread of food, and they couldn't have been any more generous in terms of the spread that they put on for us. But again, it's a lot of, we've tried to work really hard, and again, with our cricket clubs and everyone that's been involved, to try and get the girls to really take control of their lives here, and just to be able to support and be in the background and pop up when we need to. And again, there's lots of people that have been connected to this and provide the relevant support at the relevant time. And that can and has looked a little bit different and felt a little bit different for different people at different stages. So it's been an interesting journey. One of the things that we found early on was the importance of, again, the cricket piece. It was they're die-hard cricket fans, and even in a Canberra winter, it was -2 the other morning here, which people forget, but they're in their training, and young Chelsea Mondscript, who's taken on the role of being their head coach here in Canberra, and I know there's some equivalent people that are helping the Melbourne crew as well. They're just absolutely cricket mad, and every opportunity that they've got, they're in the indoor centre training, and sometimes I actually have to kick them out to get to class or to get to uni or get to to their jobs. But it's just been so wonderful to see them find their feet here in Canberra, find their feet in Melbourne, and really start to start their life here again.
So you've managed to facilitate them training together as well? Yeah,
so the Canberra, again, the geography here in Canberra, you can get nearly top to bottom of our territory within about an hour. And if you're in the centre, it's like 20 minutes anywhere. So it's quite an easy place for people to come together and train. And so I think it has been probably a little bit easier in Canberra to do that. But I know the Melbourne cricket clubs that have been involved, have certainly put the same level of support and wrapped their arms around those that found themselves in Melbourne as well. So, and it was really important that, again, it wasn't just one person that was providing sport. It was that that notion of divide and conquer, and as I mentioned before, just people chipping in at the right time. And, sometimes I was actually pulling back a little bit just to let them go and to let them explore and to let them, genuinely start to connect and find friendship groups and all those sorts of things. So, yeah, it's been a bit of a balancing act on that front. But, the girl that they and their families have driven that. And, just to see their language improve, their English language improve over time. The joy on their face when they come into my office and tell me that they've got a job for the first time, and that they're starting to be financially independent and those sorts of things, which has just been fabulous. So I must admit, it hasn't been all smooth sailing for them either. Like any, it's a traumatic, was a traumatic experience for these girls and their families. But they're predominantly doing pretty well, which is fabulous.
You mentioned a bit earlier about that honeymoon period and then a bit of a dip. Could you expand on that a little bit?
They were obviously really excited to land in Canberra, to find their feet, but I think reality set in too, in terms of particularly for those who had left family back in Afghanistan, or who reality hit it at different times in terms of, I've just literally uprooted and moved across the other side of the world to start up again. The fact that they couldn't bring any cricket equipment, cricket uniform, cricket apparel, any of that sort of stuff. I know that was a big thing for some of them, but excited is probably the wrong word there, but glad to be out and to be safe and to be free and all those sorts of things. Over time, I think reality set in, and so just being there, and not just myself, but just a lot of people in this town and a lot of people in Melbourne, to provide support as when required.
For those players who do have family still back in Afghanistan, do you know how much contact the players have been able to have with those family members?
Without being privy to every single conversation and level of engagement, I think there is a connection. I think there's probably varying across different families as well. I know one of the young players, one of the young girls that's based here in Canberra, it's just her and her brother, and so her mother, her father, other relatives have stayed in Afghanistan. So to think that you've got two young teenage, young adults here setting their lives up by themselves, like, I've got so much respect.
I think it's important that people also understand the ages of the players that we're talking about. So what were the kind of age demographics when the players arrived in Australia?
There's young kids, not cricketers necessarily, but young families, toddlers through to, older brothers and older parents, in their 70s, so, and everything in between. I think from a playing cohort perspective, in Canberra, I'm obviously more familiar with the Canberra group than those that are in Melbourne. But again, we've got those that are in like year 10 equivalent of, and I know one of the girls recently has just finished her year 12 studies, which is obviously the top of her school here, and is now studying at the University of Canberra. And again, just the joy that has brought her, and the commitment that she has towards her studies. And I think she's actually studying international studies. And so she's quite passionate about, and has been quite honest in terms of it's sort of shifted a little bit from cricket to academics or academia for her. And that is absolutely fine. Different people, things will come in people's lives at different times. And she's decided to really sort of chase her degree as opposed to a cricket at this moment. Yeah, she's a wonderful young lady, and she will absolutely go places.
Yeah, I think it's important to realise that we refer to these as the Afghanistan women's players, but lives develop and people might move away from cricket, come back to cricket moves in and out of their lives. But for those who do want to pursue cricket at the minute and want to keep playing cricket, what kind of level of coaching is available to the players from a Canberra point of view?
Yeah, from a Canberra point of view, as I said, one of our girls who's just recently been contracted for her first professional go at being paid to play, Chelsea. She's every Wednesday morning she's in that indoor centre with them, or even outside. I think they run a mile when she suggests that there's going to be a fitness element, and that's probably an area of that Chelsea's keen to work on with them. I know clubs have been very good. Again, our community cricket clubs have been very good in terms of providing additional support at club training nights, and that notion of it takes a village, different people picking them up, different people dropping them off when they didn't have licenses or transport of their own. People, as I said, sharing or purchasing equipment, so they had the right equipment here and they didn't have to share helmets and all those sorts of things. So they've had a lot of support here from a range of different people, and that's been a really nice thing. And just again, the wicket celebrations and the conversations on the sideline and the food. Again, I know I mentioned the food before, but just that joy that brings, and bringing different food to games, and even things for us, cricket and sport in Australia and alcohol, there's a connection, but just being really conscious of the fact that that alcohol isn't a big thing, and just being able to take that out of change rooms and things like that. So it's not only been about the cricket coaching, it's been about that cultural experience, and both ways, I must admit.
So are the players in the Capital Territory playing as one team together in a league?
No, so they split up, and again, it was probably a little bit different to the Melbourne group. I know the Melbourne group have stayed together, and there's no right or wrong with this either. But I think the decision for some of the girls here was that they actually wanted to expand their friendship and networks and connections in, and they felt it was a better option for them to sort of divide and conquer. And I think at one stage we probably had 4 or 5 different representation in 4 or 5 different clubs.
So back early on, when the players were first in Australia, there was a bit of noise that came out about potentially wanting to play as an Afghanistan women's cricket team in exile, as it were, in Australia. Where do you think that conversation is now among the players?
I haven't heard that conversation for a while, I must admit. And again, I haven't necessarily been focused in on that. It's been around the local support. And again, I can't stress that local element, because those community cricket clubs have absolutely been the driving force behind this as well. They are very proud of their country and their flag. A lot of them still hope to one day represent their country. And as someone, from my perspective, I'm absolutely around the growth of our game, particularly in the female space, and proud of the fact that in Australia that we are genuinely a sport for all. And I'd love to be able to see that continue to be a focus for all cricket playing nations.
And from a funding point of view, from a board, what funding is available for the players that they have access to, or for investment into their future?
I know there's been a lot of private support, and again, a lot of people that have provided support have done so, without wanting to be highlighted or acknowledged or anything like that. So there's been a significant amount. Again, when they first arrived, there were vouchers for department stores to go and buy clothes and shoes and things like that. And again, that came from a range of different pockets and people. So it's not like a weekly allowance or any of those sorts of things for the girls. A lot of them, as I mentioned before, have been really proactive in seeking out employment and are financially independent, which is really important.
What are the next steps from your perspective? You've mentioned a lot of obviously different ages, different players, different people are at different levels or different points in their own journey, as it were. What are the next steps from your point of view in terms of the support for the players and their families? Again,
it's really based on the individual, similar to how we operate with our professional female cricketers here. The individual really sits at the core, and so for those that are finishing off school, that support looks a little bit different. As I said, we don't run training in school time deliberately so they can ensure that they get to class, even though sometimes, as I said, we need to give them a nudge. So that looks a little bit different. Those that have chosen to pause their cricket at the moment, and focusing on their academics or employment, again, that looks and feels a little bit different. So it really is based on the individual, and I think that's been the beauty of it. And some of the players and some of the girls are a lot more self-sufficient than others, and that's okay. It's probably British young adults and Australian young adults that are at different stages of of being able to look after them themselves. So, but then reflecting on the last sort of 2 years, just the growth. Again, I can speak to the Canberra crew, and I'm obviously still connected with some people in Melbourne that have done a lot of the heavy lifting down there as well, and just watching them blossom, watching their language develop, watching them find friends outside. There was even a refugee. It was Refugee Day here a few days ago, and one of the girls, had brought her friends to the Refugee Day to again allow them to understand a little bit more about her journey to date. So again, when you look back and you reflect on those things, that's better than any cover drive they'll ever play. Being able to genuinely feel like they're settled and they're safe and they're valued and they can study if they want to study or play cricket if they want to play cricket, or not if they don't. It's been a big eye-opener. Most of the group that helped, whether it was hands-on trying to get them out of country or hands-on in country or in clubland, a lot of women have been driving this as well. And just again, that responsibility that we have in terms of showing that you can be a female leader, you can be a female coach, you can be a female player, you can be a mum, a sister, all that sort of stuff. And I think that's been a focus, a collective focus of our us all, because it is different. And I know even in my own role, they couldn't believe that I was in charge of men and women and boys and girls. And it's just been really nice to see them start to understand that you can do anything in this country.
That is everything for today's show. Cheers, listeners. Cheers, Lauren. And remember that in partnership with the ECB, the Metrobank Girls in Cricket Fund strives to increase the number of girls' cricket teams threefold by the end of 2026. By fostering supportive and inclusive environments for both cricket coaches and players, this initiative seeks to remove obstacles and create more confident women. Join the movement and champion the future of girls' cricket.